He pulled a gun on my wife at our own front gate. Wrong house, wrong woman, worst mistake of his life. Ever see someone try to bully the wrong person and get demolished with just a badge and a sentence? Stay with this one, because what started as a neighborhood dispute turned into a statewide investigation. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping true stories like this one. My name is Cole Matheson. 45, former firefighter, now mostly working from my home garage repairing classic bikes. I've lived in Lakewell Estates for 9 years. Quiet cul-de-sac, middle-class peace, decent neighbors, but peace has a price. And in our case, that price was the HOA. 3 members who acted like they ran a federal agency instead of a neighborhood association. If your grass grew a 1/4 inch too tall, they'd send you a violation. If your trash bin was visible from the street, fine in the mail. Don't paint your mailbox beige? Another letter. They weren't volunteers. They were vultures in polos, with clipboards. Still, we didn't push back. My wife, June, said it best. They want a reaction. Silence ruins people like that. Until the day silence wasn't enough. It started with a gate. We'd just installed a custom iron gate across the front of our driveway. Nothing major. Just a little extra security and a design we both liked. June had spent weeks picking it out, working with the welder and making sure it matched the house's brickwork. It wasn't flashy, it was just ours. 3 days later, a letter showed up. Violation, unauthorized structure visible from street. No prior warning. No knock, no conversation, just a fine, $100. June rolled her eyes. They'll be fine when they realize it's legal. She was right. We'd followed every code, filed every permit. The gate wasn't even under HOA jurisdiction. It was on private property, confirmed by county land records. She walked over to the HOA office the next morning, copies of our paperwork in hand. When she came back, her jaw was tight. What happened? I asked. They refused to review the documents. Said a new compliance officer would be inspecting it personally. Enter Mark Talley, private security hire, 32 years old. Wore tactical boots to brunch and sunglasses indoors. He wasn't from the neighborhood. He was brought in by the HOA board president, Curtis Lane, after a security scare involving a stolen lawn gnome. Mark took his job very seriously, too seriously. Neighbors said he started pacing the sidewalks. At night, like he was guarding a military base. He carried a sidearm, claimed he had authority to enforce HOA codes with necessary means. That line became infamous later. But on that particular afternoon, I was working in the garage while June watered her garden. I remember the sun was low, a soft orange haze on the pavement. Then I heard yelling. I stepped outside. Mark Talley was at the gate. One hand on his holster, the other pointing directly at June. This gate violates community codes. I'm ordering you to unlock it. Now! June stood there calmly, hose still in hand. Sir, you're trespassing. This property is under county jurisdiction, not HOA. That's when he did it. He drew his weapon, not aimed, not fired, but unholstered, and pointed it slightly downward, still gripped tight. I said, open the gate. I dropped the wrench and bolted across the driveway. Hey! But June didn't flinch. She reached slowly into her jacket, never taking her eyes off him, and pulled out something small, black, and unmistakable. A badge. Sheriff June Matheson. Badge, 5 featherweight 91. You just brandished a weapon at an off-duty. Officer on her own property. Mark blinked. June continued, voice calm as steel. Put it down, now. For 1 second, nobody breathed. Then Mark, very slowly, reholstered the weapon. June took out her phone and snapped a photo. I've got your name, your weapon serial, and your threat on audio. Leave this property now. Mark didn't argue. He turned and walked away like a man realizing he'd just stepped off a cliff in full view of a crowd. But it didn't end there. Because 2 hours later, Curtis Lane, the HOA president, showed up at our door. Not with an apology, with a threat. You've created a hostile environment for our officer, he said smugly. We're reviewing your eligibility to remain in the neighborhood. June stared at him, still in her gardening gloves. Are you saying we're being evicted for being threatened with a weapon? He shrugged. You escalated things. And with that, he left. No shame. No fear. That was the moment I saw it. In June's eyes. She wasn't just angry. She was done being quiet. The next morning, she called the sheriff's department, not the local desk. Internal Affairs filed a formal report. Then she opened her laptop and started pulling HOA bylaws, state gun statutes, and private security regulations. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was preparing a case. I asked her, Are we really going after them? She didn't look up from her screen. No, we're exposing them. 2 days later, June filed a temporary restraining order against Mark Talley. She attached the photo, the audio file, the property records, and her badge documentation. The judge granted it immediately. Mark couldn't come within 100 feet of our property, or June, or her workplace. The next day, the HOA sent out a community safety alert blaming false allegations and warning residents about individuals posing as law enforcement. June laughed out loud reading it. They're trying to make me disappear. They don't know you at all, I said, because June wasn't a poser. She wasn't a hothead. She was trained, deliberate, and legally bulletproof, and she wasn't done yet. The doorbell rang at 7:03 the next morning. A courier handed June a thick envelope marked confidential. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter from the HOA alleging defamation of contracted officers, unauthorized impersonation of law enforcement, and conduct unbecoming of a resident. June laughed. I've been a sworn sheriff's deputy for 16 years. My badge is real, my oath is on record, and my conduct impeccable. She set the letter down on the table, glanced over at me, and said, It's not just about us anymore. And just like that, she opened a second folder. This one labeled Board Member Background Checks. You see, June had access, not abuse of power access, proper legal investigatory channels. She didn't break any laws. She didn't misuse any systems. She simply asked the right questions. And the answers? Let's just say the HOA board wasn't nearly as clean as they wanted people to believe. Curtis Lane, the smug HOA president who tried to evict us, he'd been cited 4 times in the last decade for contractor fraud on his rental properties across the state. Fined twice, settled the other 2 out of court. Nothing criminal, but plenty unethical. Then there was Anita Bragg, the vice president of the HOA. Publicly, she was all about neighborhood harmony and community preservation. Privately, she'd been funneling HOA funds into her son's failing landscaping business for years. A business that, coincidentally, won every single HOA landscaping contract. And Mark Talley, the armed officer who pulled a weapon on my wife? June requested his license records through the Department of Consumer Affairs. What she found was chilling. His armed guard certification had expired 9 months ago, which meant, legally speaking, he was carrying a loaded firearm without a valid license on our property, while threatening a deputy sheriff. That alone was enough to bury him. But June wasn't interested in burying anyone, not yet. She wanted to pull the roots out. She knew that if she took this straight to court, the board would play the victim. They'd claim overreach. That she was using her badge to intimidate a community group. They'd call it personal, emotional, retaliatory. So instead she went cold, strategic, surgical. She started with a quiet meeting at the county recorder's office. We sat in a small, back room, June explaining the property line dispute. How the HOA had attempted to fine us for a gate that wasn't under their jurisdiction. The clerk pulled up the parcel map and confirmed it on record. This isn't HOA land, he said plainly. They don't have the authority to fine you. Can I get that in writing? June asked. He printed it, signed it, and handed it over. Step 1, proof of overreach. Step 2, transparency. June filed a Freedom of Information Act request for HOA meeting minutes, budget records, and vendor agreements over the last 24 months. It took 2 weeks to process, but when the files came through, they were a gold mine. Buried in the PDFs were over $42,000 in consulting fees paid to shell companies, multiple security upgrades billed at triple market cost, all routed through Mark Talley's personal LLC. And most damning of all, a line item for resident compliance bonuses, payments made to select board members, labeled as honorariums, each coinciding with dates residents were fined or harassed. June built a timeline, every dollar, every meeting, every name. Then she made copies, dozens of them, and began quietly sliding packets under doors. Not everyone responded. Some looked away, but others knocked on our door at night, quiet, unsure, asking questions. Is it true the HOA paid itself to fine people? My mom got harassed for planting sunflowers. Can you help her? Is it illegal to remove a board member? That's when June made her boldest move yet. She organized a neighborhood meeting. Not loud, not public, just a calm flyer on community. Mailboxes, informational gathering, Tuesday 6:30 p.m., Lot 17, Matheson Residence. We bought folding chairs. Made lemonade. Set up a projector in the driveway. 27 residents showed up. That night, June stood in front of them. Not in uniform, not behind a podium. Just a wife, a neighbor, and someone who'd had enough. She spoke calmly. I'm not here to fight our HOA. I'm here to expose something wrong, quietly and lawfully. If we don't hold people accountable, they think silence is permission. Then she clicked to the first slide, a chart showing HOA dues and how much was actually being spent on the neighborhood. It was less than 30%. The rest? Misfiled, misallocated, or just missing. Slide by slide, she laid it all out. Fake permits, illegal weapons, fines with no legal basis, personal enrichment under the disguise of community upkeep. By the end, no one was clapping. They were too stunned. June closed with a single question. Are you ready to vote? Under HOA bylaws, if more than 50% of homeowners sign a petition to remove board members, a recall vote must be held within 30 days. By the end of that night, 41 signatures were on the petition. By the next morning, it had 64. And that afternoon, Curtis Lane sent out a mass email calling it a smear campaign orchestrated by radical influences. June replied to all, "See you at the vote." The final domino fell a week later. The sheriff's department issued a formal citation against Mark Talley for impersonating law enforcement and brandishing a weapon without certification. His private security license was suspended indefinitely. And the HOA? Forced to comply with their own rules, they scheduled a special vote for the recall. 3 board members were removed, 2 others resigned before it could even take place. And the last, Anita Bragg? She showed up to the vote, looked June in the eyes, and said, "I didn't think anyone would ever call us out." To which June replied, "That's what happens when you point guns at the wrong house." The HOA vote wasn't held in a private office. It was held at the Community Recreation Center, the one with peeling paint, broken benches, and a tennis court the board hadn't maintained in over 4 years. Fitting, really. A crumbling building for a crumbling regime. June didn't campaign. She didn't knock on doors or post signs. She didn't plead, bargain, or threaten. She just showed up, quiet, calm, clipboards in hand, with the evidence, the files, the signatures, and a presence that made people straighten their backs when she walked in. At 6:02 p.m., the doors opened. By 6:17, over half the neighborhood had arrived, and by 6:43, 3 of the 5 board members were sitting alone in the front row, visibly sweating. Curtis Lane still wore his smug expression, but it cracked the moment June stepped up to the podium and calmly said, This vote isn't about drama. It's about direction. She didn't grandstand. Instead, she handed out stapled packets to every chair, a timeline, financial documents, violations of state law and internal bylaws, photos, quotes, recordings. And then she just said, "You've seen the files. You've seen how they've treated us. If this is the leadership you want, vote no. But if you believe we deserve better, let's clean house." And then she stepped down. No applause, no fanfare, just the weight of truth sitting heavy in the air. The vote was counted by independent residents, 3 seniors who had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone else. When they finished, June stood in silence as the lead counter, Ms. Tilda Hargrove, 78, Walker, floral dress, announced it loud enough for everyone to hear. By a vote of 71 to 12, the board is recalled. Curtis stood up. "You have no idea what you've done." June replied, "Actually, I know exactly what I've done. I've restored the rule of law to a street that forgot what it meant." And then she turned and walked out. The next 2 weeks were quiet, not the kind of quiet that hides tension, the kind that breathes relief. HOA signs were taken down. Security patrols vanished. People smiled again at block corners. Some even offered to help repaint the rec center. The new interim board was chosen the next month. All regular residents. All volunteers. They asked June to chair it. She declined. You don't want the sheriff in charge of the town. You want neighbors watching out for neighbors. Instead, she recommended 3 people. Sandra, who ran the community garden, Malik, a former Marine, with a business degree, and Ms. Tilda Hargrove, who simply said, "I've lived too long to be scared of clipboards." Curtis Lane? He left the neighborhood within a month. His house listed quietly, sold below market. Anita Bragg moved 2 streets over and kept her head down. No more HOA work. When June saw her at the grocery store, Anita turned away. June just smiled and picked up a box of tea. And Mark Talley, the man who drew a weapon on my wife, his license was permanently revoked. The security firm that hired him was fined $25,000 and shut down for falsifying credentials. He tried to launch a new consulting firm, but his name was now tied to too many public records. In the end, he disappeared into obscurity. Good. Some people don't need to be punished loudly. They just need to be prevented. As for June, she went back to being, well, June. Saturday mornings in the garden. Sundays baking banana bread for the neighbors. The badge stayed in its drawer, the rifle on its rack. But every so often when someone new moved into the neighborhood and asked, "Hey, what happened to the old board?" you could see the locals pause and then gesture gently toward our house. Ask her. She'll tell you how the gate changed everything. There was one final moment that brought it all full circle. A young couple had moved in across the street. Freshly married, nervous about the HOA, hearing whispers about the old drama, they knocked on our door one evening, holding a permit and a set of paint samples. "We want to paint our porch," the woman said. "We just weren't sure who to talk to." June looked at the form, smiled, and said, "You already did." They blinked. June pointed to their house. "It's your porch. You filled out the form. You live here. You don't need permission to exist in your own home." That's what we fixed. They stood in silence, then smiled. Truth is, most people think power looks like a raised voice, a loaded weapon, or a firm order barked through a megaphone. But sometimes power is a woman holding a hose, staying calm, under pressure. It's a badge flashed only when absolutely necessary. It's law used like a scalpel, not a hammer. And sometimes, power is not rising to their level, but forcing them to descend to yours, where truth, paperwork, and patience are deadlier than any gun ever pulled. The following spring, Lakewell Estates didn't just look different, it felt different. The lawns were still mowed, the mailboxes still painted. But the energy, it had shifted, lighter, looser, less like a prison with painted shutters and more. Like a neighborhood that remembered it belonged to the people, not the paperwork. No more anonymous warnings taped to doors. No more fake officers walking around with mirrored sunglasses and twitchy hands. No more board members hiding behind bylaws they hadn't read in years. Instead, there were weekend barbecues again. Kids rode their bikes down the sidewalks, without their parents peeking out every 5 minutes, afraid someone might yell about helmet regulations. The rec center got a fresh coat of paint, not from a contract, but from volunteers. Even the neighborhood Facebook group, once a war zone of HOA threats and complaint threads, turned into what it should have always been: recipe swaps, pet photos, and community garage sales. It didn't take banners or speeches to mark the change. It just took one quiet woman and one very loud mistake to turn everything around. June, for her part, stayed away from the spotlight. She politely declined every media request, didn't respond to interview offers, never bragged. She simply said, "I didn't fix anything. I just stopped letting it stay broken." When the sheriff's department offered her a commendation, a public one, she accepted it quietly, in a closed-door ceremony. She shook the hand of the captain, posed for one photo, and folded the certificate into her purse like it was a grocery receipt. I asked her afterward, "Do you wish it hadn't happened?" She thought about it, then answered the way only June could. "No, because I wasn't the only one who needed that gate to close." Turns out a lot of people were waiting for someone to say no first. A few months later, we hosted a small cookout in our yard. Nothing big, just 6 families, folding chairs, some brisket, lemonade. Toward the end of the evening, an older man approached June, someone we'd never spoken to before. He lived 5 houses down, kept to himself. Veteran, quiet, mostly stayed indoors. He shook her hand and said, "I watched the whole thing, from my porch. Every meeting, every signature. I thought I was too old to care anymore." June smiled. "Guess not." He nodded slowly. "You didn't just change things. You made me want to be part of things again." He left without another word, but that one moment stayed with her for weeks, because what June did wasn't about revenge, it was about restoring something, a sense of belonging. A reminder that you shouldn't have to fight to feel safe on your own property, or be bullied by those who hide behind made-up authority. 2 years passed. The interim board became a permanent one, but with rotating positions voted in every year. No more lifetime power seats, no more unchallenged signatures. And June? She went back to her real love, teaching firearm safety courses to young women. Not to scare them, not to militarize them, but to give them the same calm she'd carried. That day when Mark Talley pulled a weapon on her. "I don't teach them how to shoot fast," she'd say. "I teach them how to never need to." She taught them how to breathe, how to stand, how to see power coming and not blink. One day I came home from the hardware store to find June sitting on the porch. There was a girl next to her, couldn't have been more than 19. Nervous hands, sharp eyes, listening hard. When the girl left, I asked, "Another student?" June nodded. She said she wanted to know how to stand her ground without shouting. I smiled. "You're pretty good at that." She looked out across the yard, the sun sinking behind the trees, casting long golden lines across the street. The gate. Our gate. Still there, still closed, still exactly how we installed it. She said no one takes her seriously because she's just a girl. June paused. So I let her wear my badge for a second, just to feel the weight. I said nothing, because I knew that badge weighed less than 4 ounces, and still, somehow, it had shifted the ground under a whole neighborhood. People talk a lot about justice. They picture courtrooms, gavels, big speeches, sometimes revenge, sometimes chaos. But they forget that the most powerful justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks out in a jacket with garden gloves tucked in the pockets. Sometimes it waits, watches, collects paperwork. Sometimes it just says no. Not here, and makes it stick. That's what June did. She didn't need backup, didn't need to shout, didn't need to brandish anything but the truth. She turned the tide not with bullets or fists, but with law, clarity, and composure. And she reminded a whole community that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of boundaries, people. Still ask me what happened to the man who pulled a gun on my wife, and I tell them he vanished. Because men like that don't survive in places where people like June stand tall, not with rage, but with roots.